What is up, guys? Thank you so much for being here. So today I'm going to set up my settings and custom buttons on the Sony A7IV, and you don't have to do it the exact same way that I'm gonna, but I just know that it can be helpful to watch somebody else set theirs up. For one, so you can kind of like learn how to do it, but also it might give you some tips on how you want to set yours up. So let's just jump right in. All right, so starting off from the main menu here, we're going to start with the red one that says shooting, and just hit over and image quality, you click on that. The first one is for like JPEG or high efficiency. I'm just gonna leave it on JPEG. We've got the image quality, and I have mine on RAW plus JPEG, so if you click on that, you see you get options for just RAW, just JPEG. I'm doing RAW and JPEG. And then for the RAW type, you have compressed, lossless compressed, and uncompressed. The uncompressed is gonna give you the most information there, but if you don't want your files to be as big, the compressed RAW is still really good. And JPEG quality, extra fine. And I don't know why you would want to change this, maybe to make your files smaller, but I'm just going to leave it on 33 megapixels. So you can click OK. Next is your aspect ratio. So if you want your photos to be like a square, you go 1 by 1. This is what you would do, 16 by 9 for a lot of like thumbnails for YouTube. For now, I'm just gonna leave it at 3 by 2, but this is something that you switch situationally. Now, file format for movie, this is like if you were to click on the record button while you were in photo mode, but if you did, you see it says here, a basic setting for movie shooting, you can set all items when you set to movie mode. So we'll do that when we go to movie mode. For now, just leave this on A7IV, S4K. I'll get into all these later. And movie settings, it says the same thing, 24 frames. I'm just gonna select the best one. We can talk about this later, because you're typically not gonna record movie while in photo mode. The next setting is for APS-C mode. So if you click on that, you'll see you get on, auto, or off. And auto, the reason I'm leaving it there is because I do own some APS-C lenses, and that basically just makes it so that when I put an APS-C lens on there, it automatically goes into crop mode. But I also have this set to a custom button. That way, if I want to switch over to it with a full frame lens on there just to get a little bit more reach, I can do that, but just leave it on auto for now. Long exposure noise reduction, it comes as default on. I'm just gonna leave it. I don't do that many long exposures, but I guess I'll have to maybe do some testing with that. But the high ISO noise reduction, I'm just gonna turn off. That way it doesn't affect my photos. For color space, you can just do sRGB unless you have a reason to do otherwise. The lens compensation, you can just leave off. I don't mess with that. And then we'll go over here to media. Format is obviously if you want to format the card that's in there, you have to do one at a time. But record media settings, this is for what you want recorded where, because this does have 2 memory card slots. You got the photo mode and video mode. So you could have all your photos go to slot 1 or slot 2 or to both. And then same thing with all your videos. You can tell them, maybe you want your photos to 1 and your video to 2. But I just like everything that I'm recording to go to both. That way I have a backup. Because believe it or not, I have had a memory card fail and I've lost footage that way because I didn't have a second memory card slot. Auto switch media, I'm just leaving off. Image quality settings, we already set all this before. I think that's just another place to do it for an individual card, I guess. Now, recover image database, I believe, is for if you're trying to recover information from the card, like if it's not working on your computer, you might be able to put it in here and try and recover that. It typically is going to do it automatically, I believe, if it's detecting any issues, but anyways, you can kind of troubleshoot that. And this is pretty cool because this tells you like how much is left on each card. So here, you click on it and it tells you you can take this many photos and this much movie. It goes based off the settings that you have set up. So we'll go back and go to File folder settings. If we click on that, this is where you can like set a file name. So I changed it to A7IV just because it only gives you 3 characters. And that way it'll say A7IV and then a series of numbers because I have it set to series. And folder name, I'm just going to leave on standard. As for the rest in this section, I don't touch, so I'm not gonna bother with that. So we'll back out of there and go to shooting mode. And this is where you can set like memory recalls, which I guess I'll show you later because I don't really set up any memory recalls for photo mode, but I do set some up for video mode. So let's back out and go to USB streaming. This is where you can change like the settings for when you're streaming. I don't stream, so I'm just gonna leave it on 30p HD. Drive mode, you typically have your drive mode set right here, at least I do. If you wanted to like change it from single shooting to continuous, you know, you got different speeds and everything. But I'm just gonna leave it on single. But this is where you would set a timer and all that. Like I said, you can access it from a custom button. I typically set it up right here. So let's back out of here. I don't really do much bracket shooting, so I'm gonna skip that. Interval shooting function. This is really useful if you're gonna do like a time lapse and you don't wanna use like the slow and quick option, which is a little bit easier, I guess, but this is still pretty easy. You just tell it how often to take a photo and how many photos to take and all that. So that's where that is. I'm not gonna really mess with it right now. I have a button set up for that. Shutter silent mode. I mean, this is where you could set up different silent shooting. I don't really mess with this one. I leave that off, but for shutter type, if you wanted to go to electronic shutter, so that way, you know, it's not making the mechanical shutter noise every time. But the only problem is I think it like changes what capabilities you have for like how fast you can shoot. So I don't think you can shoot as fast if you're doing continuous. So, you know, in most situations, I don't need it to be silent. So I'm just gonna leave it on mechanical. I can always change that in the future. The rest of these, I'm just not really gonna change because I don't need it to like release without a card in. You know, why would I need it to take photos when I don't have a card? So the rest of these just don't affect how I shoot. Go down here to image stabilization. I'm gonna have this set to my menu so I can change it when I want, but this is more for video shooting. You know, there's very few cases where I would want to turn it off for photo mode. Talk about that more in video mode. Oops, let's go back here to zoom. Now this zoom area is where you could change, like if I have optical zoom only because there's a zoom lens on there. But even if I didn't have a zoom lens on there, if I wanted to get a little bit more reach, I would just go into crop mode. But it's still a good option to change if you have like a prime lens on there, but it's not gonna let me change it in the settings that I currently have. This is just like the zoom key. Like if you were to use the little knob here to zoom, that's how fast it zooms. So you can change the speed, but I'm just gonna leave all that alone. Shooting display, we've got like grid line display. This is just if you want like the rule of thirds, which you can see I have on there. You can also switch it to off if you don't want it, or you can change it to like the diagonal with the square grid. So you can see now you have like a center point. And as for this, I don't mess with it. Yeah, you can just leave that alone. So we're done with all that section. Over here to exposure and color. ISO, we're just gonna have set, you know, from a button. Here you can also like change the minimum and maximum ISOs, but if you're using like a certain movie mode, which we're not in movie mode right now, but if you were, you know, your minimum ISO would change depending on like what picture profile you have. Exposure compensation, I don't really adjust any of these. Metering mode, and again, I mean, this is just how I set mine up. Metering mode you want to leave on multi because you have other like options, but this is just gonna obviously use multiple surfaces, so it's better for the exposure. And then face priority in multi-metering, that's better because you do want it to prioritize the face for the exposure. You can leave that on center, and then the auto exposure lock with shutter, like when you half press the shutter, it's on auto. I would just leave it on auto. The flash, I don't mess with flash, so I'll go out of there. White balance, I'm also gonna have set to my menu or a custom button, but you know, this is where you would switch it. Like those are the different custom ones, auto white balance. Priority set in auto white balance. This is like if you want it you know, the auto white balance priority to be like for ambient light or white light, but I just leave it on standard. And shutter auto white balance lock, I don't mess with that. Color tone, this is, okay, so dynamic range optimizer I would turn off. We can kind of mess with your photos. And as for creative look, there's different like creative looks that you can do that kind of change, well, the look of it. But I just leave it on standard because Sony's color science has gotten super good lately, and so I would just leave it there. If you wanted to shoot in a picture profile, but again, there's no need to. In video mode, you know, we'll mess with that, but in photo mode, I'll just leave all this off. And soft skin effect, I would leave off. It basically just softens the skin, so you can go here and you can change it from low, mid, high for like how intense it is, but it can make it look artificial sometimes. Now maybe it's better on this new camera, I'm not sure, but I just leave it off. I think I set it to a custom button because I was planning on trying it out, but for the most part, you can leave that off. So zebra display, I do use zebras, so I've got it on. And what that is basically, it like puts these black and white lines on things that are overexposed. So if you have it set to 70, it only, I believe, only will go on things that are 70% overexposed, like something like that. And then if you go to 100, it's basically only going to go on things that are 100% overexposed. But even then, you can recover like a little bit of it, so most of the time you're still good, unless it's like a lot of lines on there. And then there's 100 plus, which is probably for sure overexposed. I normally leave mine on 100. We'll back out of that, we'll go back to the menu, and now we're on the purple one, which is focus. So AF/MF, this is where you can change like your focus mode, which I'll also have this set to a menu, but I, for the most part, leave it on continuous autofocus. It comes default as automatic AF, but I would leave it on continuous AF. It just, you know, it's gonna do a great job. So you can leave that there. These ones I would just leave in balanced emphasis. Autofocus tracking sensitivity, I just leave mine on standard. And AF illuminator, that's that little red light that kind of flickers towards the front, I just leave to auto. Aperture driving AF, I'm gonna leave in standard. Autofocus with shutter, have it on. Basically when you half press the shutter, it autofocuses. So I'll leave that. And pre-autofocus, I'm gonna leave off. I don't want the camera trying to do something when I'm not telling it to. So go back over to focus area. And this I'll have set to a menu, but this is basically just to switch the type of area. I'm just gonna leave it on wide. You can always spot focus by touching the screen. So, you know, that's probably the best way of doing that. You see this little button right there? So if I touch the screen, that's to focus. So it's focused on something, and then you can click that to make it go away, or you can click that again. You see the little lines there? That's for tracking. So now anything you touch, it's gonna track that spot. Even if you move the camera around, it'll track that spot. So you could use that to track an item or a person or a certain part of their head or whatever, but cancel tracking and leave it to off or touch focus. So that's why I just leave this on wide. But focus area limit, this is if you have this set to a menu to where you can switch the focus area. This is where you can uncheck certain options. That way, when you go to the menu, you don't see like a zillion different options. You can just click the ones that you use, and then that way you won't have all these other ones to scroll through every time. But for now, I'm just not gonna mess with that. I'm gonna leave this off, and focus area color, I'm just gonna leave that white. I'm not gonna mess with these three registering autofocus areas. And then area display during tracking, I'm gonna leave that off. Autofocus continuous area display, I do have that on. It just kind of shows you a box, I believe. And then the rest of these I'm just gonna leave like that. Now, face/eye autofocus, face/eye priority and autofocus, I definitely leave that on because if I'm not taking a picture of somebody, then it won't be picking up on an eye. And there's a few situations where you might want to turn it off, but I'll leave that there. And then Face/eye subject. This is where you can switch it to human, animal, or bird. I'll put this in my menu so I can switch it quicker if I needed to in the future, but leave it on human for now. I'm not gonna mess with this. And then the right or left eye select. So I just leave it on auto, but if you wanted it to only track the right eye or the left eye, you can do that. But I'm just gonna leave it on auto so it can just decide which one it wants to focus on. It's gonna typically select the one that's closest to the camera. Face/eye frame display. So this basically just gives it a little, I leave it on, but this gives it a little square around the eye to show you that it's tracking. So that's pretty helpful, or around the face. So face memory. This is if you wanted to like register a face so that it always recognizes that face. And then that way, if you're in a crowd, it would like focus on yours. It would make yours the priority. So you see registered faces priority is on, but I don't have my face registered, but you could do that. Auto magnifier and manual focus, I'm gonna leave off. It can be useful, but for me, it's just really annoying because I do like to use manual focus sometimes when I'm really trying to dial in the focus. And it's annoying because every time you go to turn the focus on the lens, then it just like zooms in, and it gets annoying because I don't want it to zoom in every time. So leave that off. Focus magnifier time, like when you do use the focus magnifier, because you can use it just as a custom button, which I do have set up, but I put no limit because it'll switch right back after 2 or 5 seconds. So I'll put no limit. That way, you have to switch it to manual focus, and then I have C1 set up so it zooms into the wall. And so if you don't want it to switch it back right away, also initial focus magnification, if you set it to 1, when you hit the focus magnification button, it's not gonna zoom in right away. So it's kind of dumb because then you have to push it like an extra time just to get it to zoom in, and I wouldn't be pushing the button at all if I didn't want it to zoom. So I set it to 5.5, that way it zooms the first time I push it. And then autofocus and focus magnification, I'll set that to on. And peaking display, this can be very useful if you're trying to like really see what's in focus. It basically just gives you a color. And so I have it set to off right now, but that's because I have it on a custom button. Peaking level I set to mid because high can be a little distracting. And then peaking color, I leave it on red unless of course I was trying to focus on something that's red, but for the most part red sticks out the most. So I've got it set there, and now you see that there's certain things that are red, and that's basically telling me that those things are in focus. But I'll turn that off, go back, and we're gonna skip everything here, everything there. It's just not things that I change. But this last yellow tab that says setup has a lot of useful stuff. So area/date, this is like you don't want to change this unless you're going to be overseas or something like that. The language, this is the kind of stuff that you set up at the start when you turned on the camera for the very first time. Then we've got this if you wanted to reset everything or save it or load it to something so you can transfer it to another camera, but I'm not going to mess with that. And then operation, customize is where you can really customize everything. So this is a really fun part of the settings. So this is for customizing all of your photo stuff. So we'll do that first. For rear, I just leave this on auto exposure lock hold, which I don't really use, but I couldn't think of something else. But in the future, I'm sure I'll switch it up. Here, I put autofocus, manual focus, select toggle. That's this button. If you want it to switch like from autofocus to manual focus and actually stay on that, which is what I prefer. I don't like having to hold it. I like to just switch to manual focus, do what I want, and switch back. Focus magnifier, that's what I showed you, my C1 button. So I can zoom in and just make sure that I'm focused. And then I switched this one, C3 button, and it kind of shows you right there. It says 4, but it's called C3. I set as the APS-C crop mode, so it's kind of nice. You can go into crop mode very quickly and back out of it very quickly. And number 5, which is this bottom trash button, it'll still be the trash button when you're going through your pictures and all that, but you can change it to something else as well. I'm just gonna leave it on this. Basically, it just turns off your touch operation. So if you're getting annoyed because you're accidentally touching it, you can just turn it off and then turn it back on. So it's kind of useful. Now rear 2 is a whole nother set of buttons. So this is an actual button if you click on it, and I have it set to the zebra display select so I can turn it on and off. And then the soft skin effect, I put it to the middle right here because I don't normally use that button, and I figured I can just use that to try out the soft skin effect to see if it got any better, but I'll probably change that in the future. This I like to have as my drive mode, so you just click right here, and as you can see I can switch through all the different options. I'll leave that as ISO, and the bottom one I set to interval shooting. So if you click down on that wheel, then you get your interval shooting, and you can set all that up. Here, I'm not going to change the movie button because I like the red movie button to be what it's supposed to be. So if you want that focus peaking, I can just turn it on and off from here, and I already have it set to how I want it. So then I can just turn it on and off. I'm not going to adjust this right now, but that's to like change the custom button on your lens if your lens has one. And this adjusts all the wheels, which is nice. So the front I have set to ISO. I have this one set to white balance, which is nice because you can switch it from the different white balances. So you can see it's on auto, and then sunny day, shade, cloudy day, all the different ones. You can go straight to your custom settings. You can see customs 1, 2, and 3, which I haven't set up yet, but that's where you could do that. So I'll set that up eventually for this little studio of mine. That way I can automatically just scroll to the custom white balance that's set for this studio. This one a lot of people like to use for different things, but I actually like to use it as my aperture because I just think it's useful to have my aperture, my ISO in the front, and then my white balance. And then this dial is what I use for my shutter speed. So that way I've got all those controls on dials, and I just like it. So yeah, TV means shutter speed. I don't know why, but yeah. So we'll back out of here. We'll do the video ones once we do all the video settings. Custom key settings, I'm not positive, but I think it's to adjust a couple of buttons for like playback, but I'm not 100% sure. I should probably look into that, but it's not something that affects how I shoot. So now the function menu settings, this one's really important. This is where you can set, see this button right here? It says FN on it. So that's for function menu. You can access it just by clicking it, and then you get 12 slots to customize. And let's go back to it. So all of these ones are for photo, you can see, and then these ones are for video. And so you can set them up how you want. I'll just go through the photo ones. I've got drive mode, even though I have it on the custom button. But focus mode and focus area, this is the only place that I have those for quick access. And then metering mode, which I won't really change, but I put that there. The exposure compensation, since I am not using this button for that. I don't really mess with that very often, but have it there. And then the shutter type. So if I wanted to quickly, if I wanted to quickly switch to silent shutter mode, I can do that. So I have that there. And if you were to switch any of these, you can just click on them, and then you can literally go through the entire menu and just go look for what you're looking for. And then you just click on, image quality, and then it would be image quality. But I'm just gonna leave it. This one I have to the face/eye subject, so I can change the type of subject. And then my white balance, this opens up the actual menu for that instead of me just being able to scroll through the different ones. So I could go here and actually set a custom white balance. So if you just scroll through these, go down here to custom 1, custom 2, custom 3. And if you wanted to, you could click over and click set. And that square right there, you would just put your gray card, and then it would set it up. So it's super quick and easy. I'll do that for this room eventually. Steady shot, which I can turn it on and off from here, but we'll use that more in video mode. Image quality settings. Obviously, if I wanted to change the quality for any reason. Aspect ratio. This is what I was telling you earlier. You might want to switch it to like 16:9 if you were making like a thumbnail or something. And then creative look, in case I ever decide to dabble in the creative looks. You know, the majority of it is not something I really need access to, because all the stuff I really need access to I have set to different custom buttons. We'll get to the video ones later. Now this section's pretty important because when you click on it, it says you can set different settings for still image mode and movie mode in the next screen. The setting set for checkmark is independent. So I pretty much just checkmark all of them because I want everything to be different. When I switch into movie mode up here, I want it to just not bring over any settings that I had from photo mode. You could change that if you wanted certain ones, but yeah, I just have them all set there. That way if I have a picture profile on or my aperture or shutter speed or whatever, it won't switch over, you know. That way when I go to photo mode, vice versa, it's set up the way I want it right away. These are the display settings. So this is for the monitor and that's for the viewfinder. So monitor, you can like tell it what you want it to display. I have display all info, no display, histogram, and a level. And then there's this one that's like a black screen with all the different things in there. I turn that off just because when I scroll through my different displays, I don't ever use that one, so I don't want to have to scroll through it for no reason. Make sure you click enter or else it won't save your settings. But let's go back to the viewfinder. And here I just left all these on. So display all info, no display, histogram, and my level. Record with shutter, that's if you wanted it to record video with the shutter button. I don't want that, so I'll leave that off. Dial customize, it's another place where you can change dial settings. I'm not gonna mess with any of that. So touch operation, you can adjust if you don't want it on at all, you can turn it off, but again, I have that button there. The rest of this I don't change, so don't mess with that. Accessibility, this is kind of nice if you wanted it to, well, it says screen reader, if you wanted it to read to you, and you can change the volume and the speed for like it reading the menu. I believe that's what that is, but I don't need that. The finder / monitor, so the viewfinder or monitor, this is where you can change like the brightness and that kind of stuff. Select finder / monitor. So this is on auto. That means like when you cover the screen, it automatically goes into the viewfinder mode. It's got a little sensor there, you can see. So I just leave that on auto. Monitor brightness. This is where you can switch it up if you wanted to make it a little brighter, a little dimmer. I'm just gonna leave this in the middle. I think that's plenty good. But up here, if you wanted it to go straight to max, you just hit on sunny weather and it goes straight to max. So I do have a setting for that for quick access, so I can just go straight to sunny weather if I needed to. Viewfinder brightness, wants you to look in there, but basically it's where you set up the same stuff. And then finder color temp, that's the viewfinder color temperature. Wants you to look in there to adjust it. I'm not gonna adjust it, so I'm not gonna worry about that. If you change your viewfinder frame rate to high, don't think it lets you mess with this, but I put the display quality to high and the finder frame rate to high, just because I want to get, you know, the highest quality on both of them. And this I'm not gonna mess with. The gamma display assist I'm not gonna mess with, but that's for if you're like shooting in log and you wanna have like a color display on here so that it's not as gray on the display, so you can kind of see what it would look like. But I'm not gonna mess with any of these. And then don't mess with that. And then auto review, this is when you take a photo and it automatically lets you see the photo, like it displays it on the screen. You know, you can have it display it for 2 seconds and then go back to normal or whatever. I leave mine on off because I will take a bunch of photos and then later if I want to look at them, I'll just go in and look at them. Okay, we're getting close. So power setting options. And by the way, once we get through this and we're doing all the video settings, it won't take as long because, so this and the power save start time have to do with like when it falls asleep. I have them both set to off because you can have it set to 10 seconds or a minute where if you're not messing with it, it just goes to sleep. But I just have mine on off. And then auto power off temperature. This is a really important one. You might even want to do this. I probably should have told you guys about this one right away, but this is so it doesn't overheat nearly as quickly. And even on my old camera, my Sony A7IV that we're using for this, I have it set to high as well, and I've never ever had an issue. That basically just means that it's gonna get to a higher temperature before it auto powers off. If you have it set to standard, this is a big reason why people think that they like overheat very easily. But the newer cameras, you know, maybe not the A7 III, obviously that one overheated, but the newer cameras, if you have it set to high, it's gonna last plenty of time. So just set it to high, you won't have any issue. It gives you a little warning, but I mean, I've never had an issue with my A6600. Obviously, if it felt like it was, you know, getting to an unsafe temperature, you can turn it off, but you should be good there. And then sound options, this is important. Audio signals, this is for if you wanted to make little sounds like beeps when it's focusing and stuff. I can't stand that, so I just turn that off. USB connections, I mean, you can mess with all that there. I'm not gonna go through it. Same with external output. I'm not gonna mess with this because I don't really use that. Setup options, you don't really need any of this. Down here is where it tells you what version you have. So if you ever were doing, I don't know, a software update or something, you could do it there, and you see it tells you the body, that's the version type. So there you go. So let's switch over to video mode. So you can see right there, we switched. We'll go to the menu. And by the way, this little gray star, this is where you can make like your custom menu. That way if you run out of space in your function menu and your custom buttons, and there's other things that you want to use that just take a little too much digging, put them here. So like aspect ratio and just some things that I will almost very rarely mess with, but I put a few things there. You would just click on this, add item, and you basically just go find that item, and you can create multiple menus. Oops. Anyways, let's start with the video settings. Image quality, file format. I have it set to XAVC S4K, which basically the top one, it's the most compressed, but it's the most difficult to like edit. So it's gonna have, your computer is gonna have the hardest time with it, but your file sizes are gonna be smallest on this. So that's the advantage to that. But the quality is slightly lower. You know, for the most part, all these look very, very good. Just to get that out of the way, you know, I don't want you to get confused and think, oh, this doesn't look good. I can't even really tell the difference, to be honest. This one, the file size is going to be a little bit bigger, but the quality is supposed to be a little bit better, and it's a little easier to edit. And then down to this 4K one, the file sizes are huge because it's not compressed at all, but it's supposed to be the highest quality and look the best. But if you notice, if I click on this and we back out, it says I have 1 hour and 8 minutes of record time. Right there, it shows the memory cards. But if I switch it to this one and then back out, it says 2 hours and 39 minutes. So it's like 2.5 times as much space. So if you want the best of the best, you can click on this, and it'll be the easiest to edit on your computer as well. But the file sizes are enormous because these are 128 gigabyte memory cards, and it can only record 1 hour and 8 minutes, it said. So for the most part, I'll probably record in this, but if I'm making like a little project and I want it to look really good, I'll probably switch over to this guy. But for default, I'll leave here. And movie settings. So for now, I can just leave it on 24 frames per second, but I'll have that set to a menu so I can switch it quickly. And for the record settings, you basically always want to choose the highest one possible because the 422 10-bit is going to give you the most color depth and just look the best. And let's back out here. Slow and quick settings. I'll also have this set to a custom button, but I kind of have it set up for doing like a quick, easy time lapse if I needed to. So I have it 4 frames per second. Record frame rate is 24. And of course, the highest quality that I can do. I don't do proxy settings. I already showed you what APS-C mode is. And lens compensation, I don't mess with. Instead of backing out for each one of these, we're just gonna run through it by pressing down, because you can see it lets you go to the next menu automatically. So format, I showed you that's where you can format the card. This is where you can tell it what you want recording where. File settings is different for video. Title name settings. See, instead of just putting A7IV, I could actually put A7IV with the Roman numerals. But anyways, so you can kind of, it shows you there how it will look. A7IV 1 2 3 4. And if you were to switch this to date and title, it has the date and then the title and then the number. But I'm just gonna leave it like that. Exposure control type, I'm not gonna mess with. Camera set memory. We'll click on this, and this is where you're gonna set up all of your memory recalls for the top of this dial. Let me back out and I can just kind of show you how I set each one up. But all you would do is you would go through and set all your settings like you want them. Just click on shooting mode, click on the camera set, and then choose which one. You just hit OK, and then it would be saved there. This is how I set mine up. So number one, remember I showed you for normal video, I have it to A7IV 4K. That way I can not really have to worry about running out of space. But if I wanted it to have higher quality, I have A7IV 4K 24 frames, 1/50th of a second, PP11 for my picture profile, which is the S Cinetone. And anyways, so I've got most things set. Obviously I might have to adjust a couple things like ISO and white balance, but anyways, it's mostly set. And then number two, you see it switched to A7IV 4K 60p, and that does switch to crop mode, and also it's the high quality, so again you only get 27 minutes of that, which is not that much, so you better make it count. But for the most part I'm just gonna do everything for manual, but that way I figured I would have all my B-roll and higher quality settings on my presets here. And then number three is just A7V HD 120 and 1/250th, and yeah, so that way I've got all that stuff set up. But for the most part I can just do everything manually from movie mode, A7V 4K. Went over this stuff a little bit, the USB streaming, shutter silent. Now audio recording is one of the ones that isn't on photo mode. So obviously you want audio recording on. I don't know why you wouldn't, you can always just mute the sound later if you didn't want it in post. But yeah, audio recording on. This is audio recording level, you can change it. Right now I have it set towards the middle, but we'll see, the more I use this I might change that. Skip these. So wind noise reduction you want to leave off probably, unless you catch yourself really needing it, but probably just leave this off because you don't want it trying to reduce wind noise if maybe there's not even any wind. That can mess up your audio and it might do that. And I don't use any of those. Image stabilization, you can switch it from active to standard or off maybe if you're on a gimbal or something. But I have it set to standard right now, but I'll probably use active because that's really, really good. Now it does crop in a little bit, so there might be some situations where I'd prefer to use standard, but for the most part, I would just use active. But I've got that set to a menu item, so I can just quickly change that. And then for zoom, this is where you can change it. If you wanted to use clear image zoom or something like that, I probably wouldn't use digital zoom. Between these two options, I would just choose that one if you're gonna. But otherwise, just use optical zoom only because you can zoom on your lens. And if you have a prime lens, I guess you could do this, but you could also just use crop mode if you wanted to get a little reach or something. And again, these are the zoom speeds. So shooting display we talked about. You've got the grid, rule of thirds and all that. And this one, emphasize recording display. When you have it on and you go to record, then it actually puts an entire red box around, which just makes it easier to see instead of it just saying record right there. So I like to keep that on because it just makes it easier to see that you're actually recording versus just the 3 red letters. Now marker display, so you would have to turn this on to use any of them, but if you did turn this on, then you could use these different marker displays. So for example, center marker, if you turn that on, you'll see that there's now this center crosshair looking thing. And it's just a personal preference. Personally, I don't really care for that, so I'm just gonna turn all these off. But there's aspect ratio markers and different things like that. So it's pretty cool, but I'm not planning on using it right now. Now exposure, Now again, we went over these things, so I'm not gonna really touch on that. Same with the exposure comp, I'm not gonna mess with that. Metering modes are all the same. The shockless white balance, this is to adjust how quickly it transitions, like if you're going from outside to inside, or just like a different color of light. That way it's not as jarring to see it like transition so much from blue to yellow or something. So you can make it fast or you can have it slower. I just kind of stuck it in the middle for now. And the color tone, so this is obviously really useful for video because this is where your picture profiles are. And I use picture profile 11 because that's S Cinetone, you can see. And if you wanted to use S-Log 3, I believe that's PP8. Yeah, so that's PP8. But they're all useful and it just kind of depends on what you're doing. HLG can be really useful. That's what I'm recording on right now on my A6600. I'm using HLG 3, but I really want to use this S Cinetone, so I have it set to that for now. And there's that soft skin effect again. Zebra displays we talked about. Focus mode, I'm going to leave in continuous AF. Autofocus transition speed is how quickly the autofocus transitions from one thing to another. So if you want it to be super responsive and quick, then you would obviously move it up. But if you want it to look more cinematic, maybe you might slow it down. That way it actually looks like you were pulling focus. But for now, I'm going to leave it on 5. And depending on what I'm doing, I might slow it down. Focus assist, we talked about it. I think the only thing is focus map is different. It basically just gives you this weird looking map, and everything that's blue is behind what's in focus, and everything that you can see is in focus. And then if something is out of focus in front of that, it'll be red. And we talked about focus peaking already. So let's get down to my custom buttons for video. Here we go. So my custom keys for video. Some of them are the same, but a lot of them are different. So I set the auto exposure lock toggle button to picture profile. That way I can just switch to the picture profile I want right away just from here. And then this button right here I left as AF/MF select toggle. I left C1 as the focus magnifier. This I also just kept as my APS-C mode, because that can be useful for video as well. And this trash can down here, I actually switched to the breathing compensation. If you have a lens that's compatible, which this one is, a lot of the Sony G and Sony G Master lenses are compatible. And basically it just compensates for the breathing that you would normally see. And breathing is when you're focusing and it focuses on something closer, and it kind of, you see the shift on the outside of like the edge. And if you have focus breathing on, it won't do that. It's really, really cool actually, especially for making like videos look just more cinematic and smoother. So back over here, I left this as my zebra displays. So now I've got this on for my audio record level. That way I can just quickly access it with this button and adjust it if it's too loud or too quiet or whatever. Autofocus transition speed, remember I mentioned I might want to slow down my autofocus transition speed if I want it to look a little more cinematic and not so quick and jarring. So I can adjust that there. ISO I left, and then audio level display. I didn't really have anything else to put there, so I don't plan on turning it off, but I can turn it off if I want to from there. And we've got the movie shooting mode, peaking display, that's still the same, These are all the same. Skip this. Function menu for video down here, I've got the record frame rate, so that way I can change that quickly if I want to change my frame rate when I'm, not wanting to use my memory recall slots. Got focus mode, focus area, slow and quick frame rates. That way I can just access this quickly if I am doing a time lapse. Because sometimes you need to change this depending on whether you're doing a time lapse where there's people versus just clouds. It moves a little slower. Yeah, peaking level, zebra level, can adjust those. The eye autofocus subject, autofocus transition speed, I put it here as well. Image quality settings, that's just dragged over from this menu. I probably could think of something else to put there, but I haven't yet. And then I put the focus map there. And then the reason I put these two like as the first ones is because when you access your menu, it goes to that one, and it's just quicker to be able to access these two right away. So all these ones, but that way I can quickly change, you know, the type of stabilization that I'm using. Let's back out of that. We already talked about this mode, which is to keep certain settings from transferring from movie mode to photo mode and vice versa. Display screen settings, we already did all the screen settings for the viewfinder and the screen. And record with shutter, I'm leaving off. I think that's everything, because everything else we already talked about. So that's all my settings. I think I was pretty thorough, but if there's anything that I didn't cover like well or didn't go into detail enough, definitely let me know in the comments down below and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. And don't forget to hit the like button. It's a super helpful thing that you can do. It actually helps out my channel a lot, so I would appreciate that. And subscribe if you're not already, because I do a lot of these kinds of videos that have to do with lens reviews, camera gear, anything like that. And so I would really appreciate that as well. And thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.